Chelsey Dulaney, how are you doing? Good to have you on.
Good morning.
What have you been up to over the weekend?
Sad to tell you that we're going to have to talk a little bit about politics today.
Oh, it's fine. As long as it's not our bunch. I mean, this merry bunch of, I can't use the second part of that phrase, but yeah. But we will talk politics, no doubt. And listen, and coronavirus is a thing. We're going to have to talk about that as well. What were you up to this weekend, by the way? Just a bit of small talk before we get into the politics.
Well, we've had a bit of snow here in Berlin, so we took my roommate and I took the dog to the park, and she had her first winter snow.
Oh, wonderful.
So that was the main event. There were lots of teeny tiny little snowmen being built around Berlin. It was actually quite lovely.
Oh, wow. Now, one thing you don't know about me is that I've seen snow, but I've never, ever touched it. Ever. How
does that happen?
We sometimes have snow in our mountains, but I think I'm relative, not so much after my corona, but relatively fit, right? But climbing that high to actually touch it. So I've never, ever, ever been in the midst of snow. So that is really something that I need to. It's on my bucket list, by the way. So
yeah, get over here to Berlin. I mean, we don't get that much snow, but occasionally we'll get a big storm. So
absolutely,
it's worth experiencing once in your life.
Absolutely. And then, of course, once you've been in the snow, there's some good beer too. So there's nothing wrong with that. But let's talk about the European Union continuing to confront a shortage of vaccines. Some are calling for a bloc to consider they're calling for the bloc at least to consider using the Russia's Sputnik vaccine to help them obviously replenish those supplies. Of course, EU-Russia relations are strained. So how likely is that move?
Yeah, I think that's something everyone in the EU is trying to figure out right now, because we are in a really difficult situation, and some have even called this a major scandal for the EU, because there is a major shortage of vaccines in the EU right now. We've very much fallen behind other Western countries in the vaccination rate. If you look at the UK, you mentioned earlier Boris Johnson, and their vaccination rate is almost at 15% of the population. Here in Germany and the EU, we've only vaccinated about 2% of the population, and there has been a lot of criticism of that, obviously, and we are seeing a lot of manufacturing problems, but this is putting a lot of pressure on EU leaders to look elsewhere. And if we're going to have, if we're going to continue to struggle to get vaccines from, say, AstraZeneca in the UK or the BioNTech-Pfizer alliance, then a lot of people are saying, okay, maybe we need to consider other options. And one of those options is the Sputnik V vaccine from Russia. And if you remember back in August and earlier in 2020, there was a lot of criticism of the Russian vaccine because it was done very, very quickly. There was a lot of skepticism. There was a lot of talk about how Putin had given it to his daughter, and it was a very politically controversial vaccine. So the EU had sort of shied away from even considering that vaccine because it didn't seem safe. It didn't seem like it had been really developed in a safe way. But now that we are really in this crunch now, we've heard a number of politicians here in Germany, Chancellor Angela Merkel, the Bavarian Prime Minister Markus Söder, saying, you know, this vaccine does seem to be safe. There was actually an announcement earlier this week from a very prestigious scientific journal that the vaccine seems to be about 90 to 92% effective. That's really in the same line as some of these vaccines that have been developed by Western countries. So now that it does seem to be safe, there is a growing call for the EU to consider this vaccine. And Russia has already said that they could provide about 100 million doses to the EU in the second quarter. And that would be very significant. We're only expected to get about 75 million doses from BioNTech Pfizer, which was the first approved here in Europe. So that could be really a game changer for the EU. But of course, EU relations are very tense right now with Russia. Even this week, we saw the Putin critic Alexei Navalny sentenced to more than 3 years in prison. And we've seen a lot of EU leaders really condemn stem that action. So I think the EU is really struggling to figure out how to walk this line of, okay, we actually could really use these vaccines, but there are broader diplomatic tensions between the EU and Russia. And I would say we also have a similar situation with China, which is producing a lot of vaccines right now. There is also questions about the efficacy of those vaccines, but I think the EU has to decide whether it's worth it for them to sort of break line on some of these broader political challenges to really speed up the vaccination effort.
Well, this is true. I mean, Sputnik does sound like it'll give you a spring in the step. I mean, all the other vaccines have
shoot you right up in his face.
Politics. I'm so glad we're not in it. But anyway, it's going to be rather interesting. Now, many wealthy countries, Chelsey. By the way, for those who've just tuned in, we are chatting to Chelsey Dulaney, who is with DW in Berlin, looking at these top stories internationally. And many wealthy countries, Germany amongst those countries, have pledged to be part of that COVAX program, which would see which would see the vaccines being donated to the poorer countries or given to the poorer countries, right? But now we're seeing delays in the EU. How is that likely to impact on that pledge?
Well, it's certainly going to make it more difficult for these global organizations, for these other global leaders to really maintain those commitments that they've made to poorer countries. As you mentioned, if a country like Germany, like the EU, are having trouble getting enough vaccines to vaccinate our population, it really portends a lot of trouble for other countries. And we have seen this COVAX effort, which is being led by the World Health Organization, and they've pledged to deliver about 2 billion vaccines by the end of the year to poorer countries. But there is a lot of questions about whether they'll be able to maintain that timeline at all. They haven't started delivering any yet. They do expect to start delivering vaccines to the African continent sometime in February, but they will be facing obviously the same supply constraints that we're seeing around the world. And we've seen a lot of forecasts. For example, Bill Gates, who's been involved in this effort through his foundation, says that developing countries are probably going to be about 6 to 8 months behind the developed world in terms of getting vaccines to the population. So that is obviously very concerning. And if you think about what that means for the world, the longer this goes on, the longer the vaccine is, the longer the virus is spreading, the more mutations we might see as well, the longer it will take for the global economy to recover.
And that's the thing, right? It's not about rich or poor countries. You're not going to be closing off your doors to Africa. You're not going to be closing off your doors to countries that have not received the vaccine yet, because you are going to look at supply chain issues and a whole host of other things. So spot on. But the pandemic has certainly, this is obviously it's affected us in a similar manner, but I see that the pandemic has hit the German beer sales as well. Sales fell more than 5% last year. And of course, we know that Germany is known for one thing. Well, there's a couple of things it's known for, but beer is certainly one of it.
Beer is definitely one of our major passions here in Germany. And I think if anything symbolizes what the pandemic has done, it's really the decline in German beer sales. No, that's just joking. But yeah, I think there's obviously much more serious impacts. But here in Germany, this is quite a significant piece of data that we've gotten out this week from the federal government. So yeah, this is the biggest decline in post-war history for German beer sales. And I would say that it's not that people are drinking less beer in their home lives. Many people are drinking more at home, but the big declines we've seen are really from, the restaurant industry and as well as events. So because we've been in lockdown, because people are not, going to bars, to restaurants, that's been a really big blow to the restaurant industry. They've seen sales fall in some cases up to 70% for some of these restaurants. And of course, as well, here in Germany, some of our big beer drinking events have been canceled last year, such as Oktoberfest. That's an event that can bring in millions of dollars for industries in that area. So that's a major blow. And after seeing this data, we've seen a lot of breweries, a lot of restaurants come out and say we need more help because we're going to be in lockdown for the foreseeable future, and we don't know if we'll be able to have Oktoberfest this year. We don't know what the forecast is, what the outlook is for these major beer drinking events here in Germany. So this has certainly underscored the need to help out some of these breweries here in Germany that are very crucial to our culture.
No, it certainly is. And, we have the one thing that this virus has done, Chelsey, is that it's been a great leveler. So whether you're sitting, on the tip of Africa where we are, or whether you're sitting in Berlin, you're facing exactly the same issues. The scale might be different because obviously, like in businesses, some businesses have much bigger balance sheets and they can leverage off cash, etc. Same thing. You've got richer nations who might have more reserves than poorer countries. But at the end of the day, the fabric of those nations, the businesses that run it, are being affected in the same manner. We've had a curfew that started from 9 o'clock in the evening up until I think it was 4 or 5 in the morning. So obviously restaurants can't serve dinner. We had an alcohol ban. Never mind anything else. We banned alcohol for 3 months because we needed to, clear up beds for all those stupid people who get in their cars and drive once they got themselves slaughtered. And that has had a significant impact as well. So it has been the great leveler. Are people talking about learning lessons from this particular virus? And when I say lessons, not necessarily health lessons, business lessons.
Yeah, I think there are certainly lessons to be learned from this pandemic. I think what we've seen, especially here in Europe, is really a reassessment in the state's role in business. If you think back to the financial crisis, there was a lot of sort of blaming of countries when they got into trouble. And now, because this is something that's being shared globally, as you say, we're all in the same boat. I think there's a lot more support for the government to be helping out these businesses, and at least here from an economic perspective, this idea of being really afraid of debt and being very strict on things like budgets. We've really seen that go out the window here in Germany, at least. So I think sort of on the same line, being in the same boat, it's really shown everyone from politicians to business people that it is important for the state to be able to help people out. And I think it's really underscored just how important that is.
And by the way, and very pertinent indeed, we talk about Oktoberfest, of course, which is held in Munich. It's probably less likely to go ahead. But the interesting thing about Oktoberfest, by the way, someone would think you're asking a stupid question when you ask when Oktoberfest is. But it actually starts in September and ends in October. I was there a couple of years ago, probably 4 years ago at Oktoberfest. I don't think I've ever had as much beer poured into one glass than I did back then. The good old days. But anyway.
They're pretty hard to lift. Very heavy glasses of beer.
It certainly is. You can start a gym with that, right? So if you do enough reps, you get the arms right, you can then drink it. It'll be your reward.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's a very good workout.
Absolutely. But Chelsey, great chatting to you. Have a fabulous weekend. And I look forward to the next catch-up.
Thanks, you as well.
Cheers, mate. That's Chelsey Dulaney. Chelsey, of course, with Deutsche Welle out in Berlin, looking at the top international stories as it pertains to Europe.